The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata, which is none other than our very own mind, called various different things in various different religions all over the world through time immemorial. But that's because it cannot be named. This is one of the reasons why Siddhartha Gautama, known as the Buddha, refused to allow anyone to create statues of him. The earliest representations were of the burial stupa that he was buried in, supposedly. His ashes, that is. This is why in Islam, no representations of Allah are allowed. There would be impossible to have any representations of what is beyond representation, what is beyond naming, which is our very own being with a capital B. So today is the final day of this 7-day sesshin here in northern New Mexico at Mountain Gate in September 2022. But don't get too casual about things yet, because in a week we have another sesshin starting. The more we can practice, and it's not just amount, it's quality, the deeper we will go to becoming truly free in our lives. True mind is sometimes spoken of as luminous transparency, emptiness, and yet filled with potential. This is another reason why we can't name it, really, because who and what we really are is fluid, eternal, and responsive to circumstances. But as we grow up, we develop habit patterns, we develop compensations for painful events, painful feelings, unpleasant experiences that create a kind of a framework around ourselves. And we find ourselves living in more and more constricted space in our minds. So we enter situations and find that anxiety comes up, or we have a memory that is uncomfortable. As you do your practice, continuing on a regular basis, and regularity is really important. If we do it sporadically, then we do it for a little bit one day, and then 2 weeks from now we do it some more. In the meantime, we've gone back down to zero. If we want to keep the practice going deeper, we need to keep it going deeper by sitting on a regular basis. That requires commitment. And there's a wonderful poem that was written many, many years ago and was shown, it was posted at the Rochester Zen Center for a long time. It is called Commitment. And it reads, until one is committed, there is hesitancy, the chance to draw back, always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of initiative and creation, there is one elementary truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That the moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves also. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance, which no person could have dreamt would have come this way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets, quote, "Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it." And that was by W.H. Murray. And it makes a difference when we commit, and seriously 100% commit. And that's the sticky part, particularly when it comes to Zen practice. It's not that easy to commit to Zen practice. It takes time out of our life when we would rather be pursuing pleasure. It's not that easy, although it's a very simple practice, particularly extending the out-breath. But there's another factor that comes into play as well. As we continue to extend the out-breath, it begins to melt this framework we've built around ourselves to feel safe. The framework is artificial. The framework is actually doesn't exist, but it does exist in our own minds. We feel like we have to act a certain way, we have to be a certain way, we have to do a certain way in order to feel safe. And even then, curiously enough, we still don't feel safe. We still have moments of anxiety walking into a situation, for example. And our modern life speeds everything up so fast that before we know it, the present moment is gone. And we're dreaming of the future, or we're uncomfortable in the present, so we step out of the present and go into our heads and dream some more. There's some quotes I'd like to share with you. The first one is by R.D. Laing. "We live in a moment of history where change is so speeded up that we begin to see the present only when it's already disappeared. And yet we dream of the past, we focus on the future, and so often do anything but live in the present moment, because the present moment can feel dangerous. And yet it really is the only moment we have. Past is a dream, future is a dream." There is a story in Zen of a monk who had spent decades reading, studying, and writing commentaries on the Diamond Sutra. The Diamond Sutra, there is a phrase in it that triggered a profound awakening experience in the sixth patriarch of Zen, who was at the time, and I don't think it ever changed, unable to read or write. His father had died when he was 3, and his father, although his father could read and write so well that he was a government official initially, and in order to become a government official in those days and for millennia afterwards, actually, in China, you had to take examinations. It's the same in some parts of our government as well in the United States. But so he was quite erudite, but apparently he was high enough up that he said some things or did some things that were not approved by the higher ups than he, and so he was banned from the capital and sent to live on the outskirts of the country, really. There was a place where they sent people they didn't want around and causing trouble that was right up against where there were potential for invasion. And he there married a local woman, and they had a son. And he died, as I said before. He was able to do any education for his son. Normally, children in Asia begin learning how to read and write, even at age 3 in Japan, for example. I don't know the details in China, but it wasn't so different, because there are stories of young, and I'm talking about 4 or 5-year-old children in China in earlier eras who could recite whole sutras they had read. But Huineng, which was his name, was not privileged in that direction. And so he helped his mother from that very early age go into the forest and gather twigs and branches and carry them to people who would buy them for firewood. And then one time when he was delivering a load of firewood to a client, he heard an itinerant pilgrim reciting the Diamond Sutra. And when it came to this point where this passage was read, he came to a profound understanding of the nature of life and death and the nature of his own mind and who he and all beings really are. And that part of the Diamond Sutra was, arouse the mind that abides nowhere. Arouse the mind that abides nowhere. That's a tall order. He was fortunate in not being educated and not having books to read, but only being out in the forest and able simply to experience life. Nowadays, in modern cultures, we have movies. It's kind of something that people write about on Facebook, that they binge watched so many movies for 24 hours or whatever. A source of pride. You filled your mind with something other than being in the present moment. And people live in the past and in the future and disdain the present, because we have conditioned ourselves to avoid. And it's hard to grow up in any culture, in any world, where there aren't uncomfortable circumstances, even painful circumstances. That Huineng's father died when he was 3, I'm sure impacted him. Dogen's father died when he was about that age as well, and then his mother died when he was 8. These things have impact. Nowadays, sickness. Lots of people end up with cancer. How many hundreds of thousands of people died of COVID just in the last 3 years? So much pain and suffering, and nobody wants to, understandably, feel anything that comes very close to home. And so we live in the future or live in the past. And it doesn't work, because we're living in a series of stories. And stories are flat. We're living a 2-dimensional life when really we have a 3-dimensional option right here at hand if we are willing to pay attention. And of course, the price of paying attention means opening not only to the joy, the happiness, but also to the pain, to the fear, to the sadness. You can't have one without the other. There's another story in Zen about a man, a very wealthy man in a very big house, who goes to the door and responds to a knock on the door, and there is this absolutely beautiful young woman standing there. She says, "May I come in, please?" And he said, "Well, of course, come in. What can I get for you? Would you like something to eat? How about a drink? Here's a nice place to sit down, relax." And almost immediately, another knock comes on the door, and he opens it, and there's this extremely ugly, bent-over person who rasps, "Can I come in?" And he says, no. Tries to shut the door. She pushes it open and says, "My sister is here, and everywhere we go together. She is happiness, and I am pain. And that's pretty much how it is. We can't have one without the other. And that does not mean that we go through life feeling a lot of pain. If we're fortunate, we don't have a lot of discomfort in our life. But on the other hand, if we have too little discomfort, there's not so much motivation to change, to open to something more incredible, more amazing. And there's something here about that as well. This is by Viktor Frankl, who, as you may know, was also in a death camp. He was Jewish, and he was put in a Nazi death camp. He did survive. I think he was a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I don't remember which. And he said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And that's what happened with Jacques Lutheran also. When he quit needing to have his environment different, when he quit needing to have sufficient food to eat, because there was no way around it, he couldn't possibly have that. He also was in one of the Nazi death camps, and death was all around him. Starvation was all around him. There was no choice. And once he let go of his need to have a choice, the need to have it different, when he changed his attitude, he was liberated. And instead of pain and suffering, even though there was pain and suffering all around him, and he was not denying it, he did find joy. And he made a difference in the life of other prisoners because of that joy and that peace that came forth as a result of letting go what he thought he had to have to be happy. There's a statement here by a Zen student. I really changed my attitude, and that changed everything. My general mind state, my moment-to-moment joy in life, and the people and activities I attract to my life. I was convinced I was going to have to change some circumstances in my life, but I found that really I only had to change my mind state. But change is not so easy. And that's where commitment comes in. If we are really concerned about living a different way of being, of living our true life, really, of letting go our habitual, what can I say? Well, that framework that we have developed to ostensibly feel safe, and yet in the back of our minds, we really don't feel safe. It's just a charade. When we truly commit to making a difference in our own life, which takes some doing, because there's a certain amount of inertia that has been going along in our lives, some of it as part of what can be called learned helplessness if we've been traumatized, where we have had enough experiences where we couldn't make things different, that we learn, we think, we assume that we can't ever make a difference. But also, to change is sometimes frightening. New and different can be scary. But here we go into that Teisho that I spoke of yesterday, where until navigators were willing to sail out of sight of land, the great discoveries of other continents in the world, America, the Polynesian Islands, South America, were not possible. People assumed that if they went out of sight of land, they'd fall off the edge because they thought the earth was flat. But in reality, although change can be unsettling. It can be exhilarating if we're willing to allow ourselves to experience simply the energy of it. And here I want to share again something that I have shared before, and that is a teaching by a Tibetan, 10th century Tibetan Buddhist master, Longchenpa. Though attachment, aversion, dullness, pride, and envy may arise, fully understand their inner energy. Their inner energy, that is the sensations in your body, not the thoughts about it. Fully understand their inner energy. Recognize them in the very first moment before karma has been accumulated. In other words, before you've reacted, before you've escaped by reacting from that sensation in your body. In the second moment, look nakedly at this state and relax in its presence. Then, whichever of the 5 passions, and that's just a standard number, but we have all kinds of feelings, all kinds of sensations, way beyond this. They're namely anger, stupidity, arrogance, and jealousy arise, becomes a pure presence, free in its own place without being eliminated. We don't have to get rid of that challenging feeling. All we have to do is tune in to the energy of it, and suddenly there is space around us. There is freedom where our mind is not caught in having to react. It's an amazing experience, but it takes some work getting there because we are so conditioned to quick shutting down the lid on any uncomfortable feeling, which prevents us from really becoming free of that feeling. And there we are, frozen because we put the lid on it and unable to really respond in a appropriate and healthy and relaxed way to whatever it was that caused us fright. Let's read this one more time because it is so important. Though attachment, aversion, dullness, pride, and envy may arise, fully understand their inner energy. Recognize them in the very first moment before karma has been accumulated. Translation, tune in. A feeling comes up, often it's right smack in the middle of our chest. Tune in. What does that sensation feel like in our body? In the second moment, look nakedly at this state and relax in its presence. In other words, stay tuned in. Be curious. This is only energy. Then, whichever of the 5 passions arise becomes a pure presence, freed in its own place without being eliminated. It emerges as a pristine awareness that is pure, pleasurable, and not conditioned by thought. Can you imagine? Walking on stage, you're going to have to give a talk, and you got butterflies in your stomach. You're tense. And as you tense up, your mind freezes. But if you tune into that sense of tension, the energy of that tension, where is it in your body? Again, quite often it's right here in your chest because that's where the vagal nerve is. And that's what responds so primarily in these kinds of situations. Tune in before it gets to be frozen. Allow yourself to feel the energy zooming through your body that ordinarily you might translate as anxiety or fear. And then there's nothing standing in your way. It is quite miraculous. But as I started this Teisho out, there's an important predecessor to this, and that is a commitment to do it. And that involves a commitment to doing the extended out breath, because that will bring you in touch with your body. It will help train you to tune in. It will help drop extraneous thinking, worries, concerns. You're not trying to make them go away. You're just going beneath, reaching for that luminous transparency that is a characteristic of your own mind. And in this way, gradually, like one walking in the midst of a fog, without realizing at what point it happens, eventually our clothes become damp. It doesn't happen without effort. And here's one more aspect to that. I have to find the right piece of paper here. Paradoxically, the more we try to change ourselves, the more we prevent change from occurring. On the other hand, the more we allow ourselves to fully experience who we are, the greater the possibility of change, which is another way of echoing Longchenpa. Change can be frightening, change can be difficult, but often, as we're doing our practice, the most difficult times are when we have the greatest potential for change. Like Viktor Frankl said, when we can't change our environment, and this is another reason why in doing Zazen, we are asked to not move during the periods of Zazen. They're not long, they're 25 minutes here, so if you find yourself in a relatively comfortable posture, there's no problem. And when you're starting out to do Zazen, it can be a little challenging because our bodies are not used to staying in position for extended periods of time. We're used to moving in order to escape. We're used to moving in order to distract ourselves. But when that is prevented, there we are with this adventure ahead of us. We can choose to tune out, or we can choose to change. And over the decades that I've practiced, I've seen marvelous changes in people, miraculous changes, because they were committed to doing it. In my early years of practice, it was not easy to do Zazen on a regular basis. In fact, that's why I moved to the Rochester Zen Center in hopes that I would be able to live at the Zen Center and practice, because I knew that there I would have to go to sittings. I would not have an option not to. And I didn't have enough self-commitment to do it on my own. Actually, there were a lot of very painful things that stood in the way. But over time, I began to see the wonderful benefit, particularly of this extended out breath, and the grounding it brings, the joy it brings, the ease it brings. Once we get a hang of it, once we are really committing to it, and that means we don't do the extended out breath multitasking. We don't do it with one eye on the clock. We don't do it thinking about what we've got to do in the day. We just do it. Tuning in to how the body feels, all the subtle nuances of extending the out breath over and over and over again. You can do it for 20 minutes better to do it for 25 minutes. Even better to do it for 25 minutes, stand up and change posture and do it for an hour altogether. Even better than that, to do it twice a day. But for most people, that's not so easy to do. But you start small, committing to getting up a little bit early, or that's probably better than staying up a little late because you're more fresh in the morning. And tuning in to how it feels, whether there's any sense of resistance, just feel it. Then it's not an obstacle. And sit yourself down, set a timer, put it out of sight, and just give yourself to the out breath in the beginning. And when I say beginning, it could be months or even longer than that. It's not easy, but keep doing it and you will begin to experience marvelous results. And then keep doing it even further and it gets even better. And yes, there are ups and downs. There are times when it's very difficult to do it, but persist. Because those are the times when, if you do it anyway when it's difficult, those are the times that bring the greatest rewards. If it's easy, be careful, because that can lead to a kind of a stale and stagnant practice, which is not going anywhere. So I leave you with these words on this final day of Sesshin, but again, in a week, we're starting all over again, and the reason we do this is because it has tremendous benefits to do 2 Sesshin in quick succession. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.